I'm Ava, a 28-year-old pastry chef. I love my job. It allows me to be creative and make people happy with my cakes and pastries. I live in a small but cozy house that I bought with my husband, Daniel. We met 2 years ago, and it was love at first sight for both of us. Daniel works as a software engineer. He's quiet and serious, but he has a good heart. We got married a year after we met, and life has been mostly good, except for one problem: my mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor Hamilton. From the day I met her, Eleanor made it clear she didn't like me. She's a tall, stern woman who always says what she thinks. She raised Daniel by herself, and they are very close. She wanted Daniel to marry her friend's daughter, Emily, and she told me so the first time we met. Emily is around our age, pretty, and she works as a lawyer. Eleanor often talks about how smart and talented Emily is. One sunny Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen preparing a new cake recipe for my blog. Daniel was in the living room, working on his laptop. I heard the front door open and Eleanor's voice calling out. "Ava, dear, are you home?" she said, her tone polite but cold. "Yes, Mrs. Hamilton, I'm in the kitchen," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. She walked in, looking around with a disapproving frown. "I see you're baking again. Don't you think you should find a real job?" I sighed quietly. "I love baking, Mrs. Hamilton. It makes me happy." She sniffed. "Well, Emily just got promoted at her law firm. She's doing so well." I forced a smile. "That's great for her." Eleanor walked over to the counter and picked up a cookie. "I still think Daniel would have been better off with her." I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. Just then, Daniel walked in. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprised but happy to see her. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by," she said, her tone softening as she turned to him. They chatted for a bit, and then Eleanor said she had to leave. After she left, I turned to Daniel. "Doesn't it bother you, the way she talks about me?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. "She's just set in her ways, Ava. She doesn't mean any harm." "But she said again that she wishes you'd married Emily," I said, feeling frustrated. Daniel sighed. "I love you, Ava. That's what matters. Just ignore her comments." I nodded, but it wasn't easy. I knew Eleanor would never stop trying to make me feel like I wasn't good enough for her son. But I loved Daniel, and I was determined to make our marriage work, no matter what his mother said or did. Life went on after Eleanor's visit, but her words lingered in my mind. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Daniel and me grew. I felt like I was walking on eggshells whenever the topic of his mother came up. Daniel was my husband, and I loved him, but it hurt that he couldn't see how his mother's behavior was affecting our marriage. One evening, while we were having dinner, I decided to bring it up again. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't keep my feelings bottled up any longer. "Daniel, we need to talk about your mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. "What about her?" "It's just, every time she visits, she makes these comments, and it feels like she's trying to drive a wedge between us," I explained. Daniel sighed, putting his fork down. "Ava, she's my mom. She's not trying to hurt anyone. She's just protective." "But don't you see? She's constantly comparing me to Emily. She even told me she wishes you had married her instead," I said, my frustration growing. Daniel frowned. "She said that?" "Yes, she did. And it's not the first time," I replied, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Look, I know my mom can be difficult, but she raised me on her own. I can't just turn my back on her." "I'm not asking you to turn your back on her. I just want you to understand how her words and actions are affecting me, affecting us," I said, my voice tinged with desperation. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Ava. I'll talk to her, okay? I'll make sure she understands that she needs to respect our marriage." I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. But deep down, I wasn't sure if anything would change. Eleanor was set in her ways, and I had a feeling it would take more than a conversation to change her behavior. A few weeks later, Daniel's birthday was approaching. I wanted to do something special for him, so I planned a small party with our friends and family. I knew inviting Eleanor was risky, but she was Daniel's mother, and I didn't want to exclude her. The day of the party arrived, and I was busy in the kitchen preparing Daniel's favorite dishes. The house was filled with the smell of baking and the sound of laughter as our guests arrived. Eleanor arrived just as I was taking the cake out of the oven. She walked into the kitchen and looked around, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ava, what's all this?" she asked, her tone disapproving. "It's Daniel's birthday. I wanted to do something special for him," I replied, trying to keep my voice friendly. She sniffed. "Seems like a lot of unnecessary fuss. Emily always says that simple celebrations are more meaningful." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Well, Daniel likes it when I cook for him, and it's his day, so I want to make it special." Eleanor didn't say anything more, but I could tell she wasn't pleased. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and focus on the party. As the evening went on, everything seemed to be going well. Daniel was having a good time, and our guests seemed to be enjoying themselves. I was starting to relax when I heard a commotion coming from the living room. I rushed in to find Eleanor standing in the middle of the room, her face red with anger. Daniel was trying to calm her down, but she was having none of it. "This is all wrong. This isn't how you celebrate a birthday," Eleanor exclaimed, her voice rising. "Mom, please. It's my birthday and I'm enjoying myself. Can't you just be happy for me?" Daniel said, his tone pleading. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You wanted to make me look bad. You wanted to show that you know better than me." I was taken aback by her accusation. "Mrs. Hamilton, that's not true. I just wanted to make Daniel's birthday special." But Eleanor wasn't listening. She stormed out of the house, leaving everyone in shock. I looked at Daniel, my heart sinking. This was supposed to be a happy occasion, but it had turned into a disaster, and I had a feeling that things were only going to get worse from here. The weeks following Daniel's birthday were tense. Daniel tried to talk to his mom, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced I had purposely tried to make her look bad. I felt like I was stuck in a bad dream, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wake up. Daniel and I argued more. He kept saying I should try to understand his mom's point of view, but I felt like he wasn't trying to understand mine. I was hurt and frustrated, and I didn't know how to make things better. Then, one day, Daniel came home with an idea. "Let's throw a family dinner," he said, sounding hopeful. "Maybe if Mom sees that we're trying to include her, she'll start to come around." I was skeptical, but I agreed. I loved Daniel, and I wanted our marriage to work. So we planned a dinner and invited Eleanor. The day of the dinner arrived, and I was a nervous wreck. I cooked all day, making sure everything was perfect. Daniel helped me set the table and decorate the dining room. We were both trying to make this work. Eleanor arrived, and I greeted her at the door. "Welcome, Mrs. Hamilton. It's good to see you," I said, forcing a smile. She looked around, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Ava. I appreciate the invitation," she said, and there was a hint of warmth in her voice that I hadn't heard before. The dinner started off well. We all sat down, and I served the food. Eleanor even complimented my cooking, which surprised me. Then it was time for dessert. I had made my signature cake, one that I was particularly proud of. I knew Eleanor had a peanut allergy, so I had been extra careful to avoid any cross-contamination. As we all enjoyed the cake, I noticed Eleanor suddenly stop eating. Her face turned red, and she started coughing. "Mom, are you okay?" Daniel asked, jumping up from his chair. Eleanor gasped for air, her hand clutching her throat. "Peanuts!" she managed to choke out. Daniel immediately got her allergy medicine and helped her take it. Slowly, she started to breathe easier, but she was still red and looked scared. Once she caught her breath, she turned to me, her eyes filled with accusation. "You did this on purpose," she said, her voice shaky. I was shocked. "No, Mrs. Hamilton, I would never do that. I was so careful." But Daniel interrupted, his voice filled with anger. "Ava, how could you? You know about Mom's allergy." "I didn't do it, Daniel, I swear," I said, near tears. Eleanor looked at me, her expression triumphant. "You tried to get rid of me. You want me out of your life." "No, that's not true," I protested, but it was like they couldn't hear me. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Eleanor left, and Daniel was furious with me. He said he needed some time to think and left the house. I sat at the table, alone, staring at the uneaten cake. I didn't understand what had happened. I knew I hadn't put any peanuts in that cake. But if I didn't, then who did? And why? I felt like the world was crumbling around me. My marriage was falling apart, and I was being accused of something I didn't do. I didn't know how to prove my innocence, and I didn't know if Daniel would even believe me if I did. I felt helpless and scared, and I didn't know what to do. The dinner disaster lingered in the air like a bad aftertaste. Everyone had left, the house was eerily silent, but the tension was still palpable. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling triumph. "Well, Ava, I guess now everyone will see you for who you really are. A criminal," she sneered. I stared at her in disbelief. "Eleanor, this is insane. I didn't do anything to the cake." "Oh, but who will believe you now?" she said, her voice laced with venom. "However, there's a way out for you. Divorce Daniel and sign the house over to him. Do that, and I won't go to the police." My heart pounded in my chest. This was blackmail. "You can't be serious," I managed to say. "Oh, I am very serious," she said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. Before I could respond, Daniel walked in. His face was hard, unreadable. "Is it true, Ava? What my mother is saying?" he asked, his voice cold. I looked at him, desperately hoping he would see reason. "Daniel, please, you have to believe me. I didn't do anything. Your mother is trying to frame me." But his expression didn't change. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but right now I'm siding with my mother. I want a divorce, Ava, and the house should be mine." I felt like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. This was not the man I married. This was not the Daniel I loved. "No, Daniel, you can't do this. We built this life together. Please, see reason," I pleaded. But he didn't budge. "It's over, Ava. I've made up my mind." Eleanor watched the scene, a satisfied smirk on her face. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and called the police. If Eleanor wanted to play this game, then let's play it with all cards on the table. When the police arrived, Eleanor immediately started her performance, tears and all, claiming I tried to kill her with peanuts. I stood my ground. "That's not true. I didn't do anything to the cake. She's trying to frame me because she wants me out of her son's life." The officers looked between us, clearly trying to figure out who to believe. And then I took out my main trump card. I had installed them in the kitchen for my baking blog. "Wait," I said. "There might be footage. We can check the kitchen cameras." Everyone's eyes turned to me. Daniel looked confused, but Eleanor's face drained of color. We all went to the kitchen, and I pulled up the footage on my laptop. The video showed the kitchen, the cake on the counter. And then, there she was, Eleanor sneaking into the kitchen, looking around before pulling something out of her purse and sprinkling it over the cake. The room fell silent as the truth revealed itself on the screen. Eleanor tried to speak, to explain, but her words were empty. The evidence was right there. Daniel looked from the screen to his mother, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. The police took Eleanor away, and Daniel and I were left in the echoing silence of the house. He tried to apologize, to explain, but the damage was done. Trust, once broken, is not easily mended. The day of the court hearing arrived like a storm, full of tension and uncertainty. The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings and the judge's stern gaze. My heart pounded as I took my seat, feeling like I was in some surreal movie. The proceedings began, and Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was the first to take the stand. Dressed in a somber outfit, she looked the part of a distressed victim. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. With trembling hands and a quavering voice, she portrayed herself as an innocent, wronged by my alleged malicious actions. I can't believe she would do something like this to me," Eleanor whimpered, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My fists clenched in my lap. It was infuriating to watch she poses as a victim. Then, without warning, Eleanor clutched her chest and collapsed, feigning a faint. The courtroom erupted into chaos. "Is there a doctor here?" someone shouted. I sat there, frozen, as people rushed to her aid. This was another one of her theatrics, but it was working. The judge called for a recess, and Eleanor was taken out of the courtroom, still playing the role of the frail, aggrieved mother. When the trial resumed, it was Daniel's turn to testify. My heart ached as I looked at him, the man I once loved, now a stranger willing to believe the worst in me. "Your Honor, I can't express how shocked I was," Daniel said, his voice steady but cold. "I trusted Ava, and to think she could have done something so heinous." His words cut through me like a knife. He was completely under his mother's spell, blinded by her manipulations. My lawyer presented my defense, highlighting Eleanor's history of hostility towards me and bringing forth the evidence of the kitchen video. The footage was clear, showing Eleanor surreptitiously adding peanuts to the cake. As the video played, there were murmurs in the courtroom. Eleanor's facade began to crumble, but she still clung to her act. "This is a setup! She's trying to frame me!" Eleanor cried out, but her words sounded hollow now. The judge watched the video intently, his expression unreadable. When it finished, he called for a recess to deliberate. Sitting there, waiting for the verdict, felt like an eternity. My entire life hung in the balance, based on the decision of a man who had never met me before today. Finally, the judge returned. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. After reviewing the evidence presented, it is clear that the allegations against Mrs. Ava Hamilton are unfounded. The video footage shows Mrs. Eleanor Hamilton adding the allergen to the cake herself. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Relief washed over me, followed by a surge of vindication. Eleanor let out a wail, still clinging to her victimhood, but her cries fell on deaf ears now. The judge continued, "Therefore, I find Mrs. Ava Hamilton not guilty of the charges against her." Tears filled my eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and triumph. The truth had prevailed, despite Eleanor's theatrics and Daniel's accusations. As I left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I had faced my fears and stood up for myself. After the trial, life seemed to move in a blur. Winning the case brought relief, but it also left a gaping hole where my former life used to be. The house felt even emptier now. I missed Daniel, despite everything, but life had to go on. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in baking and my blog. My followers were a source of strength, sending messages of support and love. It felt good to be understood and appreciated. One day, while I was recording a new recipe, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Mia. "Coffee? I have news." I smiled, grateful for the distraction. Mia had been a rock through all of this. We met at our usual cafe, a cozy little place with the best lattes in town. "Ava, you look better!" Mia greeted me with a warm hug. "Thanks, Mia. So, what's the news?" She grinned, her eyes sparkling. "I'm getting married!" I gasped, joy filling my heart. "Mia, that's amazing! Tell me everything!" As she gushed about her fiancé and their plans, I felt genuinely happy for her. It was refreshing to talk about something other than my own troubles. Then, Mia's expression turned serious. "Ava, how are you really doing?" I sighed, stirring my coffee. "I'm getting by. The house feels empty, but I'm managing." Mia reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're strong, Ava, and you did the right thing, standing up for yourself." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "Yeah, I did. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." We chatted for a while longer before parting ways. As I walked back home, I felt a sense of determination. I had survived the storm. Now it was time to rebuild. Over the next few weeks, I poured my energy into my blog, creating new recipes and sharing them with my followers. The positive feedback was uplifting. It felt good to be doing something I loved, something that brought joy to others. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Eleanor's lawyer. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside was a formal apology from Eleanor. She expressed her remorse for her actions and the pain she had caused. I read the letter, but behind every word were hidden her taunts, insults, and threats. I realized I couldn't forgive her. Not now. The next day, I received another piece of news. The divorce papers had been finalized. My marriage to Daniel was officially over. It was a bittersweet moment. A chapter of my life had closed, but a new one was waiting to be written. I called Mia to share the news. "It's official. The divorce is finalized." Mia's voice was gentle. "How do you feel?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Relieved, I guess. Sad too. It's complicated." "Take your time, Ava. Healing isn't a race." Her words comforted me. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I also knew I wasn't alone. That night, I baked a cake. Not for a video or a client, but for myself. As I mixed the batter and preheated the oven, I felt a sense of peace. Baking had always been my sanctuary, and it felt good to be in my element. As the cake baked, the sweet aroma filled the house, bringing back memories. Some were painful, but others were filled with love and laughter. I realized then that those memories were a part of me, a part of my journey. When the cake was done, I sat at the kitchen table with a slice and a cup of tea. The first bite was delicious, a reminder of the simple joys in life. I smiled to myself, feeling a glimmer of hope. Sweet justice had been served, but it was the small, sweet moments like this that truly mattered. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew I was ready to face them. This was my new beginning, and I was determined to make the most of it.